or teaching each other languages. And it wouldn't just be, the rich international school kid teaching English to, someone from a local school, but the local student also teaching the international student the local language, which is equally important.
Hi everyone, welcome to my podcast. My name is Didem. In my pilot episode, I'm joined by students from the Organization to Decolonize International Schools. I have been following them for some time now. I initially thought their work was contrary to what is expected from international schools. I will elaborate on that later, but now let's hear from them. Hi guys, welcome. Thank you for joining. First things first, who are you and what is Decolonize International Schools?
So we're a team of two. I'm Clara.
Hi, my name is Xoài.
So Organization to Decolonize International Schools was born out of a petition that we created to the IBO, the International Baccalaureate Organization, to decolonize their curriculum. We were originally called Decolonize IB, and after a month or so of having that name, we realized that we needed to have a name change because decolonization wasn't just needed in the curriculum, but also in the culture of international schools, how people are treated, not just students, but also teachers, and like how people are hired. There's a lot of discrimination in hiring practices, the accreditation of organizations, and so forth. So that's why we decided to change our name to expand the scope of our organization.
Yeah, and that began around June 5th is when we first uploaded the petition, and now it's been over 6 months since we started Otis, which is the short name that we have for it. We should emphasize straight away that we're always learning and always evolving. We are two students, and just like everyone else with the pandemic and with, in September, work and school started for us, we're continuing Otis on the side, and we're trying to we have a lot of long-term projects and things like that, and short-term projects, with just like a little to-do list of things that we try to get done, conferences and things like that we host or participate in, as well as interviews we'd like to do or podcasts we like to participate in. Yeah.
So what are your end goals as an organization?
Yeah, at the beginning of Otis, we conceived a mission statement and a vision and our core values and things like that. They're very official sounding, so people can go on our websites if they want to look at that. As we mentioned in our 6 months post, our essential goals are to be a platform for student movements and teacher movements whose main goal is to decolonize international schools, to start this discussion on discrimination, be it racism, sexism, homo, or transphobia, in international schools, and lots of other issues. Because when we first started out, it was we were mainly focusing on anti-racism. This was right after George Floyd died, and a lot of a huge uproar was going on. So at first we were very focused on Black history and anti-racism, and as our platform gained momentum, a lot of people came to us, and a lot of people from schools, they said this and this and this has been going on in my school, and we realized it was a lot broader than this, and it was a lot of racism and white supremacy, Eurocentrism in general, that was permeated into the education system that we have. So the end goal, yes, as I said, we are to be a platform just to spread the word about our movement and gain momentum, in that we want our movement to be grassroots. We want lots of people to working on a local level in their schools. What is the end goal is that everyone on a local level would be striving to create change within their schools, to create policies, to integrate new things into the curriculum, or completely reform the curriculum and rebuild it.
I understand. Those are great goals, preventing racism and all that. But about Eurocentricity, I have some hesitations. Because parents sending their kids to international schools, they're mostly expats, right? So when they enroll their kids to international schools, they expect their kids to follow Western education. We can see this from where the kids attend universities. They go to Europe, the UK, the US. For example, I've never heard of a student who's motivated to study in Indonesia. I mean, that's what they sign up for initially, I think. So how do you make sense? Of course, I'm on all board with no discrimination.
Yeah, firstly, there is a problem with that expectation. And I think there's also an issue because, like, the parents expect this westernized education, and then international schools also put themselves as these, like, internationally minded, global hubs. And so there's a disconnect there with what the parents want and with what the schools say they want to give. And I think what we want to see is schools actually living up to those missions and actually being globally minded, because at the moment it's a lot of empty words that they use to seem very, profound. But schools really need to change their curriculum and change how their teachers teach and educate their students and ensure that they are not being Eurocentric with the curriculum. Because I think it's also important, like, we're in a ever increasingly globalized world, and it's so important to understand how different countries connect with each other, how cultures have evolved over time, and like the causes of certain things. For example, the roots of policing in the US, to give one example, was a colonial militia. And so, like, they were born out of these violent groups, and now they're out murdering people and they're state sanctioned.
You're saying this promise of Western education is problematic to start with?
Yeah, I think it is, because the promise of this Western education, the expectation of parents that their kids will have this Western education, just reinforces the superiority, let's say, of the global north, and it continues to give resources to these universities in the US and the UK and other institutions in Europe, who, for years are profiting from the research of other universities in the global south. And it's also like a brain drain, because students who could be going back to their home countries or to another country completely that's not in the global north to study go there, and then you don't have that development because they don't have the resources to grow their departments or whatever. And also, if there's no students to show interest in certain university departments, obviously they can't expand.
If I could add to that.
Of course.
It's so hard to, like, have a straight line of thought, like your thoughts keep on bouncing everywhere. So what I want to say is, so you mentioned it's expats that are the students in these international schools, but as we mentioned earlier, it's increasingly the local elite, so they're not necessarily expats, but they are the upper class of the host country where the international school is located. It needs to be emphasized that we are by far not experts on the matter, and there's such a huge context on what we are discussing about, this veneration, if that is a word for Western culture, and this adulation, of a Western education. Obviously people at this point, they're tired of us always saying, oh, it's cultural imperialism and things like that. And it's very important, like I said, to acknowledge that it's such a huge long-term context, and it's important to acknowledge the nuance of that. But I'm going to give an example. We were going to do an interview with my friend Oh Cheng, which due to the confinement had to be postponed. So I don't know when our followers will be seeing that. But my friend Oh Cheng, he is Kenyan, and he went to an international school in Kenya, and all of his teachers were white. And if I remember correctly, a lot of the students that went to Oh Cheng's school were also children of British diplomats or things like that. And they never learned about Kenyan history. They never learned about Britain colonized Kenya and things like that. And it's not a coincidence. And even more than that, since he spoke English all the time at school, when he was with his family, they were so in awe of the fact that he spoke such perfect English, and they were so impressed that they wanted to only speak English with him because of that, because he was a sort of, they put him on a pedestal in that sense. And the consequence of that is that he forgot how to speak his mother tongue. He used to speak Luo, which is his tribal language, and he told me about how, because he never spoke it with his family, because they only wanted to speak English with him, he completely lost the use of it. He completely forgot it. And that's one of the many ways in which he has told me that school disconnected him from his roots.
Yeah, that's an example of erasing someone's culture. I want to ask you at this point, do you remember any instances where you feel discriminated personally by your teacher, administration, or other parents? Or did you witness someone else being discriminated in your schools?
If I could speak again, I'll say it really quickly. I think it's important to say that we're not the best people in the position to talk about these experiences, in the sense that we're both white. Like it should be said, I'm half white, but we were both teacher kids, so we were in international schools as a result of the fact that Western white teachers were prioritized. We were there as a result of what we would call white supremacy, Western supremacy, colonization, what have you. My father's French and white, so he was, I think, seen as a priority over any equally qualified teacher of color or from the local host country. So I think that I could talk about experiences like that, but I think my vision of it would not be, I think my vision of it would be biased. And I think that I was not aware, I was not paying attention at the time to all sorts of things that I'm only realizing now. And I think Clara would agree with me, and she would have a lot to add to that.
Yeah, I definitely, obviously, like I'm also of British and Portuguese descent, so I'm a white person. So I didn't really experience discrimination against myself, but there were one thing that I always noticed, not against students, but the local teachers and their treatment by administration and their colleagues who were not local, was always something that I was sensitive to. Firstly, I knew that they were paid so much less than the foreign teachers. They didn't.
That is correct.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also like in foreign hire teachers wouldn't interact with the local teachers, and they'd be kind of left to the side. They would all sit together, and then there is one thing that we've come to realize since we started this and started talking to students from our school, is the way the scholarship kids were treated at our school, because every year our school would raise funds at the spring ball with the teachers and all of the diplomats from the in Tashkent, and they would donate money for the scholarship fund at our school. And they would have, I don't know how many Uzbek students take exams, and then they would like pick the ones that they had top scores or whatever. I don't really know the whole process, but they would pick them, and then obviously they were always expected to do very well. They were expected to go to top ranking universities in the US or the UK or wherever, and there was always so much pressure put onto them. Yeah, the scholarship students every year at the spring ball, they would be kind of paraded around, and it's like, look, this is what your money is doing. You're like helping this poor child go to like some fancy school. And it's a very like damaging way, to be put in that position as a child, as a kind of, I don't know, trophy in a way. there's like so much expectation from them, and that's just kind of, that's a blatant exploitation and discrimination of those students.
Well, I have something
All
to
right.
add to the previous point really quickly, if you don't mind. Even though we still have specific memories, I still have specific memories of discrimination and very specifically microaggressions in international schools. But what's really important is that even though we recognize that we weren't so aware of it before, since we started Otis, so many, and I mean really so many people have come to us, whether it's in our private messages or in their answers to our surveys or things like that, or in Instagram accounts and things like that we have found online, where people go to confess things about their international school experiences, is that there was a lot of racism, very blatant and very serious in some cases, as well as other forms of discrimination such as homophobia and sexism and sexual harassment and things like that. So it's really motivating to see that so many people are coming out and creating these groups, whether it's on Instagram or other forms of social media, where people can anonymously open up about their experiences and say that yes, this happened, and they point out specific teachers and they call out specific schools. Actually, I think it would be good to give a shout out to Black in International Schools. Is an Instagram account that we came across recently, and that's a generic platform where people can send confessions about their experiences and maybe or maybe not mention the specific schools that they're talking about. And I found schools that I've been to actually that were called out explicitly. So I know I wasn't necessarily aware of it, but it happened.
I totally respect your effort. You put in time and energy. Let's say your voices are heard. The hiring process of teachers is unbiased. There is more cultural integration. But don't you think this inclusivity is in the service of a few privileged groups? Students who can afford half the tuition, and it will make no difference to someone who has no access to education. So my question is, what are your thoughts on free education to all? And where do international schools stand in all this?
Thank you, Didem, for that question. I think it's very important that we ask ourselves about this sort of thing, and I just want to break it down into a few sections to make sure that I really give nuance to each of those parts of the question. So firstly, about free education, I definitely believe it should be a human right. There's no question about that. And we should give all children and adults as well a space to learn and question their world of reality, because it's important not just for self-development and growth, but also for growth as a society, for dismantling systems of oppression. And so that comes into the second part of where do international schools actually fit into that. And unfortunately, they are inherently, capitalist colonial projects. They serve the elite of the local population of, diplomats' children. They serve the children of United Nations workers and people who work at the World Bank and other non-governmental organizations. And many of these schools are for-profit schools. A lot are also not-for-profit schools, but even so, the fees make them very inaccessible to the average person living in the host country. And that's why I said many children who will go through these international schools will actually follow in their parents' footsteps to become diplomats or business people. And that's a problem, and is also part of the reason we're doing this work, because the problem is if these children go through these systems with a colonial Eurocentric mindset, curriculum and culture surrounding them, then when they go out into the real world, when they leave that international school bubble, then they won't see those large systems of oppression. For example, white supremacy or the non-profit industrial complex, we won't be able to see them being dismantled because the people at the top won't acknowledge their existence and do anything to stop it. However, that is not to say, obviously, that the work of dismantling these systems should fall to those privileged people, but obviously they should be taking on that work if they are in that privileged position, with the help of others. And also not to say that they should be the only people who get those like jobs with NGOs and things. But yeah, so decolonization is, it's anti-capitalist, and it's about ridding those colonial concepts and ways from our systems. And the way we should do that, I think, is to kind of start a new era of international schools that have the purpose of educating, not for the benefit of white supremacy and spreading of that message, even if it is subtle. And these new international schools should obviously not be a space that exclude students due to their lack of wealth. I can't claim to know full knowledge of the business side of international schools, but I think in the current world we live in, where it is a very capitalist, free market kind of world, being able to keep international schools completely free, I think, would be difficult because they aren't state sanctioned. So it's not like in the UK or the US or whatever country in the world where you have free state education. It's not the same. So I think there'd be some kind of financial difficulties there, making it completely free for everyone. Unless we had like a global government or something, like the UN actually was able to create laws that were binding in all countries. But yeah, I definitely think there can be changes made to the way international schools work within the communities that they are located, whether that's giving back to the local community, developing strong partnerships, sustainable partnerships with the local community. So there's kind of a symbiotic relationship, and it's not just the international school being an elite institution in a neighborhood in a country, with no actual ties to its surroundings. And then the third part to that question is, is it worth doing this work? And it is obviously a privileged space, and so is that a disservice to others? I would have to say, it definitely is worth doing this work. We recognize that it is a very, very privileged space that we're doing it in, but it's the space that we know, it's on where we have our networks. And although we aren't serving the general population who have not had the privilege of attending these elite schools, I think, there are still very valid experiences of oppression within the international community, and it is those folks' voices that we are here to serve. And so while we're not serving, the entire population of the world, there's still a very large community which have valid opinions. There are huge systemic changes that need to happen, or abolition of it all. And the people in our community deserve justice as well.
What are your thoughts on free education, Sway?
Well, I just wanted to go on a brief tangent here, just to say that I think it's cool that we have platforms like this podcast to think out loud. Like Clara was just saying that, it's so difficult to articulate something that sounds, coherent or intelligent or whatever. And I think that's what's really cool about podcasts, because a lot of the we're not in international relations. We meet a lot of people in the work that we do that are in international relations or similar fields, and so they're sort of they're formed, they're trained. I'm speaking French in my brain and trying to translate it. Yeah, but let's just say that they're formed to debate, to articulate things, really quickly. And everyone's thoughts, everyone should be allowed to think out loud. Everyone should be allowed to, suggest to put ideas out there without it being instantly, ready for
Bashed.
a UN presentation or whatever. So, and I think that's something that intimidates a lot of would-be activists, and that prevents them from joining the discussion because they're thinking, oh, I'm not smart enough, or oh, I don't know how to make words go. And trust me, like, we're all very busy with we're all handling 2020 right now, and it's very difficult to make your brain make words go in a good way. So I think that's something that should be said out there to anyone who's like, I can't really contribute anything to this, because you shouldn't be we're not expecting you to be super articulate or whatever. We're here, like, what the point of a grassroots movement is solidarity and long-term teamwork and, understanding and things like that.
So maybe we can start from your organization and organizations as such. So you're trying to make a change in an elite environment. Don't you think this will help create a sterile bubble? And it is no good use to the average student. That was my question.
Yes.
What do you think about this? Okay, it's fine.
Sorry, my brain is like, so one of the things that we said at the very beginning was that even though international schools serve for like a very tiny minority, like a small elite group, a lot of those people, they have their ambition is to go on and be diplomats or have other jobs that would in the long term affect a lot of people, that would go towards a lot of work in different countries, that brings about new policies that can help people. So if those people are taught, if those people are given a more objective view of the world, if they're taught to be, I hate this buzzword a lot, but if they're taught to be actually global minded rather than if they're raised in this very specific Western format, then the input they'll be able to put out into the world when they have access to these, very important and accessible whatever jobs, their input will hopefully be better for people around the world. So that's one thing you can say. And another thing I wanted to add is one of the things that we've been trying to think about is ways that community service work and volunteering and things like that can be done in a way that's not charity, in a way that's not superficial, that's not tokenistic, that's not white saviory, and in a way that actually brings out true collaboration within communities of expat groups and elite groups and local communities, if I could use the word. We've been talking about big collaborative projects with farms and things like that, where everyone works together with the main goal of growing vegetables and things like that, or teaching each other languages. And it wouldn't just be the rich international school kid teaching English to someone from a local school, but the local student also teaching the international student the local language, which is equally important. And there would be an exchange of cultural capital and an exchange of values and things like that. And we're talking about all these ways that we could be bringing the resources from international communities into local communities and communities that are in need, but also communities that also have things that they would contribute, and it would be, like I said, collaborative rather than a one-sided, superficial thing.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I just have one thing to say. Just the reason that we are doing our work in the context of international schools is because that's what we know. And we don't want to go and, assume, like, we don't have experience of local education in the UK or France, for example, to give, where we live at the moment. I wouldn't feel comfortable going and saying, oh, these are all the problems with the British curriculum. They need to make changes. There are changes that need to be made, and there is a group which I was inspired by, the Black curriculum. They do lots of work with the British education system at the moment. But yeah, I think, I just wanted to kind of say that's why we work in this space, is because that's what we know. That's where a lot of our network and contacts are in. And yeah.
Clara also started joining the Rhodes Must Fall Oxford conferences during the summer. So I think it's gotten us interested in, what's going on in the countries where we're living in, France and the UK. It doesn't stop us from collaborating with, groups that we know of here that are interested in decolonizing their education. I mean, because if they're all similar issues, and it's how I got interested in researching these movements in France as well, and like how they exist in this country and the different forms they take. So we can equally draw inspiration from them and then from us, and there's nothing stopping us from collaborating.
So you have been working on this project for 6 months, right? And you talked about some changes in the British curriculum. Can you name any changes in the international curriculum, actualized reform that you know of because of this project, recent or in the past?
I mean, well, to be honest, like we started the petition and we haven't actually had any dialogue with the IB itself, which is where we started. And obviously that's something that we want to work on. But that's more of a long-term goal, because what we've realized is that, we expanded our name to encompass all international schools, because what we found was it's not just the curriculum, but also the culture. Even if the curriculum changes, if educators and the culture of the school remains the same, remains discriminatory, the curriculum won't be taught in the way it's meant to be, with that inclusive approach. And so we shifted our focus away from reform and more to empowering students to share their stories and create groups within their schools to make their schools accountable. And so we haven't had changes in policy like in a big organization, but we have we do know groups in our network that we've kind of been supporting, who have had a lot of good dialogue with their schools, and their schools are making action plans to change their own curriculum, because also the schools can, to some extent, they have flexibility with their curriculum, what they teach outside of kind of set texts and criteria. So like stuff in PSHE, or other kind of how they teach things in the context. There's a lot of stuff happening there, and schools are also starting their own kind of diversity, equity, inclusivity groups, councils, to make sure that the school is doing what they say they're going to do. And the schools are also open to learning and continuing to learn. If they make mistakes, then they will correct those. And obviously that hasn't been the response from all schools, but it is something that we're very encouraged to see. And that's the changes that we've been seeing since we started our movement. And again, it's only 6 months and we're only 2 people. And there's so much that we want to do, but there's only so much that we can do with the time that we have.
Okay.
And then teachers also have been like not us, like our group specifically, but the whole movement has reached a lot of teachers, and the Association of International Educators and Leaders of Color, for example, which is led by our good friend, I guess we could call him our mentor, Kevin Simpson. His association has reached a lot of people as well. And they started having regular conferences in the summer. They had a really big weekend-long series of conferences in November, the 14th to 15th, if I remember correctly, which had teachers from all over the world presenting and lots of viewers. I mean, really a lot. So I think it's really great that it's even if in November, in the middle of the school year, it's getting teachers to consider this and think of this within the context of international schools. So yeah, work on a local level is really important. And it's always really funny, because it's also very satisfying, because I have a friend who goes to UBC, and occasionally he hears people talk about, I was Skyping with him yesterday, he says, oh yeah, I keep hearing people talk about your group, or I keep seeing like meeting people, and when I add them on Instagram, I see that they already follow you and things like that. He's like, and he says, oh yeah, I knew her in high school, and things like that. So he's sort of it sort of feels like our group is, you know, celebrities.
Okay, I did not know I was meeting with a celebrity.
Far from.
My questions are over. Thank you for joining today. I really enjoy this.
Thank you so much for reaching out to us and having us.
Yeah, and thank you for your questions as well. They've been, it's really important to talk about these topics, and these are things that they kind of stay in the back of your mind sometimes, but you don't always bring it to the forefront because they're not always extremely comfortable questions. Like this idea of like free education, I guess, obviously I want to be a full supporter of free education, but also there's kind of a part of me, I think, that's kind of like, oh, but I'm in my privileged space, like I don't, and not that I'm like, I don't think anyone should have access to those resources, but I think there's that kind of internal struggle, if that makes sense. And I think
yes, totally.
Thank you for bringing that up, because it's something that we don't always realize, because we think it's kind of like the whole thing with like, oh, I'm not racist because I don't think racist thoughts or whatever, but like you have a lot of internalized racism that you're not conscious of. And so I think it's kind of like that, is like there's a lot of internalized privilege that I'm like, well, I've had access to it, and like not necessarily like I don't want people in that space, but it's like it's something you hold. I don't know how to say it, but it's just like
I understand your internal struggles, because I am against exclusivity, elitism when it comes to education, but what I teach is elitist curriculum, what I do is elitist.
Yeah, well, your questions are very pertinent, and yeah, like Clara was saying, it's refreshing to have someone challenge us. Like, we need that. We just because we're like a movement or activist or whatever doesn't mean we're not, full of baloney sometimes, or clueless sometimes.
I mean, everybody's like that sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Thank you so much. Good luck with your studies.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy your evening.
Have a nice day or evening.
It must be
all right.
Yeah.
There is a curfew at the moment. I cannot go out, so it's not very pleasant, but yeah. All right. Take good care.
Bye.
Be safe.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.